If you're here watching this, then today you're ready to learn about dealing with failure and shame. So we like failure and shame here at PCC, not the fact that you experience it, but what we can learn from it. Because the reality is that every single one of you here, and definitely by the time you're watching this, will have experienced plenty of failure and feelings of shame. And if you've gotten this far, it probably means that you've at least exercised this to some degree, that failure is feedback, not actually a stopping point. I like to think of it as the speed bump in the road and not the red light. For example, when Thomas Edison was asked about his invention of the light bulb and all of the failed attempts that it took to get to that invention, he said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 other ways that don't work." The truth in that statement is the more that you fail, the more times that you narrow in the focus of areas that you shouldn't be focusing on in the first place and making it very, very clear what you need to do to succeed. For example, many of you all who have come to PCC after 1, 2, 3, sometimes even more online coaching experiences. And one was okay, one was a nightmare, one was like, what did I even sign up for? One was like pretty good, but you knew you needed a little bit more. All of those experiences shaped you as a buyer, as a consumer, to know, how do I suss out the BS in this industry and know what I am looking for? Authenticity, long-term values, right? Sustainability, things like that. Or a lot of you came here because you have been doing the shiny object syndrome thing for years and years and years. I'm gonna do this diet, this juice cleanse, that pill, that fat burner. And eventually you got sick of it. And you said, I know that every single one of these things don't work. I understand the patterns of why I'm failing and what those things have in common. So you came here because you knew all of those failures served a purpose to teach you what you didn't want to do again. Now, here's the thing. When we succeed, we attribute it to the strategy that we used. For example, you lost weight on keto, or you joined a boot camp and you were more consistent with your workouts because of the boot camp. Or you hire a coach and you're successful because of the coach. But when we fail, we blame ourselves. So I wasn't disciplined enough. I couldn't keep up. I didn't have enough willpower. I wasn't focused. Why do we change the source of credit based on if we succeed or fail? Why do we externalize our successes and internalize our failures? And now the answer is not to flip it the opposite way around, right? We don't want to externalize our failures because that's called having a victim mentality, but we do want to start internalizing our successes. And this is called having an internal locus of control, having the sense that what I do actually matters and contributes to my success. If we don't have that, then we're going to continually fall off the wagon and not feel like we can change our life. And a lot of times in this context, it's actually wrong to blame ourselves for the failure because a lot of times it does have to do with the strategy. So while we're not going victim mentality, we can healthily acknowledge that strategies like restrictive dieting, keto, juice cleanses, and all the things that we've tried in the past that didn't work probably had something wrong with the approach being too extreme or too generic, too cookie cutter, too fill in the blank for what your experience was, and not enough made for you. So if you're failing or you failed, let's use that as feedback. Let's talk to our coach. Let's lean into the failure and explore it with curiosity instead of judgment. And let's find a better way. Now let's talk about what to do when you're feeling guilt or shame, because that will happen whenever you stray the path of your goals. Here's the interesting thing. A lot of us come into our fitness journey here at PCC. This is just a common trend amongst high achievers, is that we think that guilt and shame is a productive emotion. We think that that's going to drive us to do better, that if I feel guilt, I'll hate myself enough that I'll make the change. Research shows that shame actually has the opposite effect than we intend for it to. Instead of driving us to be better, it actually makes us feel worse and can actually make the unintended behavior happen more often. For example, let's say you had a slice of chocolate cake the second night in a row when it wasn't in your macros, you didn't plan for it. Maybe you think, crap, I did that again. I can't do anything right. What's wrong with me? And those exact feelings, that internal dialogue of I'm the problem, is what's going to make that behavior more likely to happen again. Guilt makes us feel worse. And because of that, we want to feel better right away. And a lot of times the fastest way to that quick dopamine hit, that quick emotional boost, is through self-destructive behavior that doesn't actually make us feel better in the long run. There was actually a specific research study that looked at this by placing participants in front of a very delicious looking piece of cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory. And they had the participants in one group envision how guilty they would feel if they had the cheesecake in front of them. The surprising results was that only 10% of the actual group was able to resist the cheesecake. On the other group, they asked them to envision how proud of themselves that they would feel if they resisted the cheesecake. And there wasn't a single person that took one bite in that scenario. So the takeaway here is that positive emotion relative to our self-image is empowering and is much more effective than employing shame when it comes to behavior change. And it can potentially increase our willpower reserve. How cool is that? Now, just because we don't want to employ shame or guilt doesn't mean that we're not going to ever feel them. Sometimes things happen and we end up acting out of alignment with our goals, even if we weren't intending to, and we end up experiencing that guilt or shame. Here's what to do when you're in hindsight and trying to pivot from those feelings of guilt and shame. We call this the ACT method. It stands for acknowledge, choose, and take. Remembering here that those feelings of guilt and shame, while we don't want to perpetuate them, we can learn to understand them as signals of what we care about rather than a feeling of moral judgment. So for example, if I'm feeling the guilt or the shame around choosing the chocolate cake when it wasn't a part of my plan, then what is that guilt a signal that I care about? It signals that I maybe care about sticking with the plan, follow through, discipline, consistency, choose a value, right? That's the C there. And then take an action based on the value, not the inciting situation. So the value would be discipline, follow through, consistency. So the action there might be to take the next action with my nutrition for the day, right? Stick to my meal prep for dinner, or drink some water, or go get some steps. But an action based on the inciting situation, the guilt of eating the chocolate cake, might be self-deprecation, more self-destructive behavior, or trying to overcompensate. And this is how you can redirect yourself from failure in a productive way. For some closing thoughts, if there's anything that I've learned from over a decade now in the health and fitness space and coaching women, it's that failure is always feedback, and self-forgiveness and compassion is always more effective than guilt and shame for productive behavior change. Lean in when you feel the hard things. Talk to your coach, learn how to explore those negative emotions with curiosity over judgment, and you will ultimately grow more and see more success in your journey in the long run because of it. Now, there's going to be an activity down below in the description of this module that you can do to reflect on and share your answers with your coach. Go ahead and take that next step, and I'll see you back here in the next module.